Purity of Darshans. In the winter of 1971, it started getting very crowded and Maharaji began telling people to go to different places. I was told to go to Puri. He also said I could go and see Goenka, a well-known Buddhist meditation teacher, on the way back. I had been feeling that I really needed to learn something about meditation, so I went to Bodh Gaya and stayed there for 40 days. During that time, my mind was exceedingly clear, like nothing I'd ever experienced before. When I came back to Dada's house, Maharaji was there. I don't know if I was experiencing my love for him in a new way or if my heart was closed, maybe both. But all I was seeing was a man doing all these different things, and I felt none of that love connection I had felt before. There was a clearness and an openness, but none of that emotionality and warmth. I stayed there 2 or 3 days and kept waiting for the return of that feeling I'd felt before, and I saw all these people opening in a way that I missed. I prayed to Maharaji, and it still didn't change. I'd decided I'd go to the Sangam, holy place at the confluence of 3 sacred rivers. While I was there, I prayed that after bathing, my heart would open again, and as I was bathing, I felt my heart open wide. I got out, and everywhere I looked, everything was glowing. I got into a rickshaw to go back to Dada's house, and I realized that I had no prasad. And the route from the Sangam to Dada's house doesn't go by any bazaars. We did pass a calendar wala vendor with those devotional calendar pictures. I looked at all the pictures, but they were so gauche. Just as I was giving up, I looked down at my feet, and there was on the ground in the dust was a picture of Ram embracing Hanuman, which was so exquisite. I bought the picture and went on to Dada's house. I was late, so I didn't think there would be time for me to reach Maharaji and present the prasad. But as I came through the door, a path opened up right to Maharaji. I was so opened up from the meditation course and the Sangam that I gave the prasad without my ego. It was the purest act I'd ever done around Maharaji. Something was taking place, but I was not doing it. I put the picture on the tucket and sat down. Maharaji picked it up and looked at it. Tears started coming out of his eyes, and I started to cry too. Then he stood up and stormed out of the room, giving the picture to Dada. A few weeks later, this picture was up in the Vrindavan temple, right next to the Murti. The point of the story is that because I was able to do that selflessly, he was able to accept it fully. At other times, I came with all kinds of prasad, and I would really want him to accept it in a certain way, and he would hardly look at it. I'd polish up the apples for hours, hold them on the bus, say mantras over them. I was trying to be pure, but this time I wasn't trying to be pure. The purity was simply there. Touching his feet. I take the dust from the lotus feet of the Gurus to cleanse the mirror of my mind. So begins a sacred ode to Hanuman. Touching, holding, rubbing the Guru's feet has always had profound significance in the Hindu tradition, for out of the Guru's feet comes the spiritual elixir, the som, the nectar, the essence of the sacred Ganges river, the subtle pran or energy that heals and awakens. To touch the feet of such a being is not only to receive this grace, but it is an act of submission, of surrender to God, for that is what the Guru represents on earth. But for those of us around Maharaji, the theories connected with the spiritual value of touching the Guru's feet had little, if anything, to do with the matter. Rather, it was the strongest pull of the heart. A mother who with her husband had come to India from the United States out of concern for the well-being of her son who was deeply devoted to Maharaji, stayed on for some time. At the conclusion of her visit, she reports the following. Then, as the time came that we had to return to the States, I began thinking about the last darshan I would have. I realized that I really wanted to touch Maharaji's feet. I didn't know why I wanted to, but I did. I figured that if I went ahead and did it, it would upset my husband. But I thought, so it upsets him, it is still my decision. At my last darshan, I touched Maharaji's feet. So to my surprise, so did my husband. How vividly I recall after my first meeting with Maharaji, how all my disdain and arrogance disappeared before an almost overwhelming desire literally to be at his feet. It was perhaps the second or third visit with Maharaji when the opportunity presented itself. I was watching the man next to me. The expression on his face suggested that he was experiencing waves of rapture, and as I watched him out of the corner of my eye, I felt jealous. We sat next to each other, cross-legged, before a large, heavy, chest-high wooden table. The man, the principal of a school in the vicinity, was probably in his late 50s. He was dressed in a heavy woolen suit with socks. His shoes has been left outside the door of the temple. A tie, a muffler, and in the fashion common to the men of the hill country in this late November, a woolen hat. Before us, sitting on the table, cross-legged, was Maharaji, well wrapped in a bright plaid blanket so that only his head showed above the blanket and a bare foot stuck out beneath. It was this foot that was the source of both the rapture and the jealousy. For the man was massaging the foot with great tenderness and love, and I was yearning to be in his place. How bizarre to find myself sitting in a tiny Hindu temple halfway around the world, jealous because I could not rub an old man's foot. As I reflected on this strange turn of events, Maharaji talked now to one and now to another of the 20 or so people gathered in the small room at the back of the temple compound. He spoke in Hindi, which I did not understand, but he seemed to be asking one a question, scolding another, joking with a third, and giving instructions to a fourth. In the midst of these conversations, I saw him move ever so slightly, and his other foot appeared beneath the blanket just beside me. I suspected that only people who had been around him for some time were allowed to massage his feet, and I was the newest corner, but I decided I couldn't be faulted for trying. So slowly my hands went up and touched the foot and began to massage, but instead of waves of bliss, my mind was full of the sharp edges of doubt and confusion as to whether I should use my fingers or my palms. Just as suddenly as the foot appeared, it was withdrawn back under the blanket. My mind was filled with self-recrimination about my own impurity. As the visit went on, Maharaji took me more and more out of my self-consciousness and into a space that had no familiar boundaries. I was experiencing waves of confusion bordering on hysteria, and that was the moment the foot reappeared before me, and again I reached for it, but this time my mind was too overwhelmed to analyze procedure. I just clung to the foot as a drowning man to a life preserver. That was one particular moment I remember in Kanchi. I was sitting in front of Maharaji's tucket, rubbing his feet for the longest time, wondering if I was pure enough to be doing this. Then I went beyond thoughts, going deeper and deeper into that love until that there was any concern about rubbing Maharaji's feet or even my love for Maharaji. I was just swimming in his feet. Sita would always sit on my right, and being a greedy, obnoxious Leo, I'd push my way up front and grab Maharaji's foot. Sita would always want the same foot, so I'd have a shoving match with her. She'd say, Get away from here. You don't belong here. And she'd throw her shoulder down to block me. Sometimes Maharaji would give his foot to me and sometimes to her. I very rarely touched his feet because I felt he was too pure. What was it about the darshan that captured us? Was it the many levels and changes, or the moments of timelessness, or perhaps the intimacy and love? Or was it the talking and chiding and humor, or maybe the purity? Then of course perhaps it was the touching of the feet, or was it all of them, or none of them? Was the connection perhaps a subjective one, beyond our dualistic experiencing? Maharaji, who are you? Are you other than our very selves? There is no answer. There is no question really. There is just darshan, which is grace. Take chai. Take chai, tea. But Maharaji, I've already had chai. Take chai, okay. Go take karma, food. Maharaji, I just ate an hour ago. Maharaji wants you to take karma now. Okay. Maharaji sent these sweets over for you, but I couldn't eat another thing. It's Maharaji's wish that you have these sweets. Okay. Maharaji sent me to give you chai. Oh no, not again. I am only doing my duty. It is Maharaji's wish. Okay. A devotee has just arrived from Delhi with a large bucket of sweets. Maharaji is distributing it. He wants you to come. Oh my God, I'll explode. It's prasad. Thank you, Maharaji. Oh no, not the apples too. Oh, thank you, Maharaji. While many experienced Maharaji's qualities of timelessness or love at darshan, everybody who came before him felt his concern that they be fed. Often even before you could sit down, he would insist that you take prasad. People just never went away from him hungry. I stopped at a gasoline station in Berkeley, California, run by a Sikh fellow. I thought I'd practice my Hindi with him. When he found out that I stayed at the temple at Kanchi, the first thing he said was, "Oh, you belong to that Baba." I visited him. He gave me puris, fried bread. Nobody else gives you food just for nothing. Many of the poor people in the areas around the temple or on pilgrimages came to depend upon the food that was freely given for their survival. But for the rest of us, such excessive feeding and continuous preoccupation with food seemed to indicate that the food represents something more. My first impression focused on all the food that was present. I had just come down from Nepal, where I had been on a strict Buddhist meditation trip for a long time, and I saw all these people sitting down and stuffing their faces. I thought, oh, they don't know where it's at. Look at the gluttons. Then I sat down to eat, and in a few days I was stuffing my face. I had never been experienced such a feeling at that literally I could not get enough to eat. It was as if I were feeding my spirit. He offered the pera, a sweet, back to me to eat, and oddly enough I turned it down. What was in my mind was that I felt completely filled and someone else should have it, so he gave it to someone else. At another darshan, he had filled my hands with peras, which I promptly ate. Shortly thereafter, he started to give me another huge handful, which I turned down, thinking that I'd had my share. An Indian behind me became upset and told me I should never turn down Maharaji's prasad, that I should always take what he offers to me. Then of course I felt bad. Next, Maharaji offered me another handful, which I joyfully received. I arrived at the temple in November and lived there continuously until the end of March. During all that time I was fed well daily, and yet not a penny was ever asked of me in compensation. I couldn't understand it. Here I was a relatively worthy Westerner, and the Indians had such a hard time economically, and yet they would not accept payment. So I just keep sneaking money into the box at the temple. I was trying to hide somewhere around the temple across the country yard from where he came out the door. And when he came out, I got pushed by the people right up to the ticket. I tried always to far away and hide myself. So when I got pushed near to him, I tried to hide behind the column. But people pushed me and pushed me. And Maharaji came out. I was scared and crying. And Maharaji gave me a pear. When I ate the pear, it made me feel like there was a water all over inside me. It was like eating love alive. Since that day, this pear has always been in my mind, and nothing has ever missed this feeling. I have never eaten another pear since that day. One day when my daughter was young and still with us, we stopped in Bhowali en route to Kanchi for darshan. She wanted jalebis, a sweet, but there were none. I said, when we go to Kanchi, there will be some. But when we got there, we found that it was a Hindu fast day, Ekadashi, literally 11th day in lunar month, and so only boiled potatoes were served. As we entered Maharaji's room, to our surprise, a man arrived with a long basket full of jalebis. Maharaji said, "Give some of that girl first," pointing to my daughter. "He knows everything." A sadhu once came to the temple and upbraided Maharaji. "You do nothing for people. You don't feed or help people." Maharaji said, "Give him a room and food and money." Yet all that the devotees felt like doing was beating this sadhu. They got him around a corner to do so, but Maharaji yelled at them. After the sadhu had eaten, he became very quiet. Maharaji said, "The thing you people don't understand is that he is hungry. He hasn't eaten for 3 days. What else could he do but what he did?" Once I said, "Why do you feed so many people and why so much? I could eat 4 chapatis, fat unleavened bread and stay alive." Maharaji answered, "We have an inner thirst for food. We don't know of it. Even if you don't feel you can eat, your soul has a thirst for food. Take prasad." The nature of the food that was served around Maharaji is worthy of note, for though it satisfied our souls, our intellects were often appalled. The usual diet at the temple consisted of white rice, puris and potatoes, both fried and sweets of almost pure white sugar. The diet was starch, grease and sugar, and much black tea. All the sensitivity that the Westerners' preoccupation with diet had awakened in us screamed at this diet, and yet this was prasad. Did you reject prasad, or did you give up your dietary models? What did you do when the love came in the form of starch, grease, sugar and tea? Greasy potatoes were one thing. A blessing from the gurus, however, was an entirely different matter. I previously believed that a saint should observe certain restrictions as to food. Also, I never took tea or coffee, and I ate a very simple small diet. I never took medicines. I wondered how people could take so many pills. After Maharaji left, I caught a cold. At first the doctor thought it was flu. Then they said it was a more serious disease, so I had to take 15 pills a day to cure it. It was all Maharaji's play. The doctor also told me to put on weight. So from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. I ate. I wondered how I could eat so much when previously I had eaten only 2 chapatis at a meal. All my old ideas vanished.